quite a few things going on. Where are you in the world at the moment? Sorry, I've lost track where you are.
I know it's a great point. Actually, I'm here in Barcelona for the Gartner event. So the last 4 days here at the Keysight booth. I hear you've been equally doing some quite busy stuff, preparing for next week's BCS event.
Yeah, not doing so much preparing, but I'm ready to go. I mean, it's an online. It's a weird thing. It's an online event for me, but a live event for you because there's a real conference going on in the BCS building. I think it's the BCS building, isn't it? But in parallel, there's a completely separate stream, which is virtual or online, whatever. And I'm chairing that. So as far as I know, I'm ready to go.
It's a hybrid event, I suppose. It's kind of what we're starting to see a lot more of. Like now, you can host the online stuff. I can host the physical stuff, even though I am in the metaverse at the moment. But it's interesting. Obviously, the BCS have got 2 separate rooms next week, with both of them kind of lecture style. One which you'll be doing remotely from Macclesfield, and one that will be in central London. So, be interesting to see, how many people are going to be turning up to the live stream version. How many people are going to be there physically. Definitely in a post-pandemic landscape, we're obviously seeing, reduces in numbers, but actually there was a web event last week in Lisbon, which had apparently over 60,000 people attended. I cannot even imagine what that's like.
What kind of event was that?
So it was a web one. Apparently, there was it was kind of crypto, Web 3.0, kind of the next generation, kind of AI, regulatory kind of stuff. So yeah, it was, a big party, shall we say? But Barcelona, the VMware conference is actually going on at the same time as the Gartner conference this week in Barcelona. So again, Barcelona is becoming kind of a tech hub for technology. But very interesting. So actually, yesterday I was out with Adam Smith, who's the CTO of Nero, and actually he got dragged off about 11 p.m. last night for the ISO committee for the 29119 software test automation event. So, for the committee, which you're very close to the ISO as well. Well, you've got previous experience of the BCS, I guess.
I've got a little bit of history with standards, yeah, but that's a long time ago. But and probably my reaction would be never again. But that probably says it all.
It's quite interesting that we say that, because I know you're in the process of migrating over the TKB, the test case, the knowledge base website, right? And one of the great features that you released last year was the ability to search for any term, right? And I think this is where we do get stuck quite a lot, is someone will use a technical term and there's potentially conflicting definitions, right?
Yeah. Well, again, that goes back a long way in that when I was involved in the component test standard, a British standard as it was at the time, we kind of went around in circles for a few months, probably, writing stuff. And we all thought, yeah, we've got some really good material here. But we didn't understand what we had in front of us, because we all had different perceptions of definitions, And so I had the kind of brainwave of saying, look, I'm going to go through the document. I'm going to scan it using a little bit of code and build a list of terms that I think we need to define. And so I did this over kind of a weekend. It took a few hours. It didn't take very long at all, really. And we came up with about 300 and something terms to be defined. And I pitched this to the rest of the group, and everyone said, oh, that's great. Now we need to write a glossary of terms. In fact, the glossary of terms became British Standard 7925-1, and the component test standard was BS 7925-2. Now, that was nearly 30 years ago. Okay. And we still have that problem, in that people come at the problems we have in testing from different perspectives, partly because they're using different definitions in their own head. And so, as you know, so I've kind of compiled a database of, I think it's 7 different glossaries now, and I'd love to get more. So if anyone out there has got a glossary they want to include, just let me know, and I'll do my best to include it. And they're all searchable, as an aggregate or individually. So, and I've got the obvious, candidates like some of the ISO glossaries, which are public, and ISTQB, of course. And I've also got the Oxford English Dictionary and Merriam-Webster from the US perspective as well, just for good measure. And they're all searchable. At any rate, as you know, I'm doing I want it to be a weekly kind of video, but it's more likely a 2 to 3 weekly cycle of coming up with what I would call explanations of terminology, not definitions. So, I started with testing and systems, and last week I did, God forbid, quality, and talked about quality for about 15 minutes, basically arguing that it's a word that I really don't like, but we have to kind of live with it. And on LinkedIn, I obviously advertised the fact I was doing this YouTube video, and not many definitions came through, but people still insisted in saying, well, quality is ... and it was something like I've never seen before, so that, those guys are talking about quality in a way that I've never experienced. So what on earth is that word doing in people's job titles, for example? Because I don't know where. Now, in his company, it might be perfectly reasonable, and they've all got a common shared view of what this means. But I somehow doubt that. But also, as an industry, we're trying to move forward, and we're still hamstringed by the poor terminology. But anyway, and as you know, we're thinking of doing analysis of documentation put out by, for example, tool vendors. So scanning the text on their website, looking at the terminology that is defined, and maybe identifying some stuff that isn't yet defined. I have to say I've got about 5,000 terms because IEEE published a glossary of all software terminology, and there's about 4,500 terms in there, because it's an amalgamation of about 5 or 6 different glossaries, but they published a consolidated version. So, we've got a terminology that is a small dictionary. so I think I'm going to be busy for quite a long time explaining all that stuff. But anyway, that's that game. As you know, we're in. We've got fingers in several pies. We both have. So that's one of them. But I've been reading up on the metaverse, and I know it's a big deal with you, but
the metaverse is a very interesting
experience of it, except the odd virtual conference product that we used testing festivals. And I'm kind of learning that maybe Facebook have got it terribly wrong, and maybe Microsoft have got it right. I mean, who knows how it's going to turn out, because it might be a 20-year program, probably. We'll know in another generation. But that social media, so Facebook, I think, are in trouble. Apparently, I'm led to believe. Allegedly,
11,000 people laid off yesterday was the
and Twitter is also under a bit of stress because of the change of ownership, of course, and the requirement to pay to get a blue tick, which is not a bad thing in itself, except that it kind of undermines the people who've already got blue ticks, because they are real personalities out there in Twitter land with millions of followers. I don't think they'll object to paying $8, but I think it undermines what they've kind of achieved in terms of their, let's call it celebrity, for want of another term. So who knows how that's going to pan out. So the last thing I'll say, and then I'll shut up for a minute, is I'm also looking at Mastodon as an alternative to Twitter. And, that seems to have real promise, and it seems to be growing quickly, but from a very relatively small base. And I'm trying to get Mastodon working on one of my servers, and having a little bit of difficulty because it's completely new technology from my point of view. It's all open source, but it's different web server. It's using Docker. It's using PostgreSQL. I don't know how do you say it. I don't even know how you say it.
Postgres.
It's different. Ruby on Rails, all new. So needless to say, I've taken a wrong turn somewhere. And although I've got functionality which works, the web server isn't serving the static pages. so the style sheets aren't there. So it looks terrible, but functionally it kind of works. So I'm getting there. So I'm having fun with that.
Yeah, it's I know this week when we were chatting earlier on in the week, you kind of said, oh, maybe, and we'll talk a little bit about the test institute in a second. But part of it was, should we be, start buying up real estate within the metaverse? And it was interesting. Again, keynote on Monday with Gartner was just kind of, as always, this is M1 because they V1 because they want to talk about the V2 of the metaverse, the V3, things like Second Life, things, most of the stuff that isn't new, right? Roboblocks and, Minecraft, none of this is kind of new technology. But what I do think is really interesting is and I tried to have a conversation about this with Adam yesterday around the decentralized internet for Web 3.0, right? What does that really look like? Is it just a derivative of the dark web? And what would the footprint look like if you were operating in a Web 3.0? And I genuinely think it's going to be interesting. And of course, when people say Web 3.0, they typically are just saying blockchain. But, again, blockchain's just so much controversy, hasn't really materialized into something which is, really valuable apart from causing one of the third biggest polluters in the world. But, I think, part of it is, we see this technology and it's the same, I remember when we were in Dublin talking about Internet of Things, right? Part of it is Internet of Things comes, there's a hype curve, we run the hype curve and then it matures. And then after, 5, 6, 7 years, people stop talking about IoT, they stop talking about, data's the new oil and all this kind of stuff. And it's already realized, right, by that point. And it was interesting because obviously contributing to the ISO standard 29119 part 11 for artificial intelligence for software testing, part of it was, how do you deal with testing an AI-based system? So like you mentioned with Ruby, people are just picking up, off the shelf, oh, I'm just going to use TensorFlow or I'm going to use, Tesseract, and I'm just going to consume a standard blueprint, whether it be Spark ML or some Azure Databricks, and they just go off and do it. And it's very similar when you're looking at an IoT architecture. And it was interesting because, Adam has been spending most of his time talking about AI regulatory kind of concerns, and that's kind of where the ISO are focusing quite a lot of their area. But of course, securing IoT is also, top of mind. Apparently yesterday they mentioned that 60% of the people who are actually getting cyber attacked at the moment are, things like manufacturing. And, it's that same kind of thing is, yes, people start rushing to, implement IoT, then securing IoT afterwards. Then there's this kind of regulatory requirement of, well, how do you make sure you are capturing the data that's been processed? It's ethical. You're not capturing, video analytics, maybe endpoints from, CCTV. You're storing it for the right amount of time, et cetera, et cetera. And this, obviously, things like medical devices and the IoT landscape kind of exploded again during COVID for beds and all these other kind of things. So these problems are kind of, I'm going to say, rebooted over and over again. But we typically, as the testing industry, right, we address something like blockchain and crypto wallets and how we actually test them. And then in a way, we go into the next thing. Now, what does testing quantum computing look like? How would you even start doing that? Part of it is we like it. It gets a bit of traction, but then we don't seem to have the practitioners coming back and saying, well, actually, 5 years, this is what we've learned about IoT. This is what we've learned about. You remember when people talked about big data and data lakes, where did that all disappear to? But, to me, this is kind of the starting point of how do I become a certified test engineer? There's you can be a chartered surveyor, you can be a chartered engineer, electrical engineer, but you just can't be, recognized in your field for, maybe I am an IoT test engineer, right? That is my trade. I know everything about testing the MQ, I forget the standard TT protocol stack, right? So, what do we need to kind of get things like, I'm going to avoid using the word standards, but, how do we get to that point where we're recognized as an industry of professionals and we've got a discipline and a progression personal development plan to kind of allow us to get to the next stage of being, of our professional development?
Well, just to step back a little bit, to reflect on the technological change that we're going through right now and how the hell we keep pace with stuff. There's kind of a pattern that we've seen in the past, which I don't think is going to change, which is stuff like, I can go way back 25 years to client server and that kind of stuff. Let's not bother with that today. But you mentioned big data. Big data. So for a year, everyone was talking about big data. And then I got talking to a guy who was a kind of consultant in that space. And he said, don't tell anyone, but most people's big data fits on a memory stick. That's what they mean by big data. It wasn't big at all. And also you could say, well, hold on, IBM have been managing data centers with massive data for decades and decades. So a lot of the big data thing wasn't new, except technology to do analysis and reporting and migration and merging and deduping, whatever, all became much more relevant to what people wanted to get out of what they thought was a resource they'd never taken advantage of. But then big data sort of faded away, but people were just doing it. They just didn't call it big data. They just said, yeah, we've got to pay more attention to data. And that was the end of that. And Internet of Things was not far behind that and kind of one of the triggers for big data becoming a big issue. But the issue there is like the challenge we've got there, I think, is many years ago when we started integrating systems through web services, we're bringing in systems from business partners, banks, customers, whatever, and kind of integrating these things into a system that delivered some value. The problem with Internet of Things is it's not like, oh, we're going to bring in 3 more applications into our landscape, either as an internal system or an external system. It's like we're bringing in 750,000 devices based at people's homes. And that's now part of our supposed, extended, I want to say extended family, but extended landscape. And I'm not sure we know how to do that. And maybe the metaverse is a possible there where we can prototype, that's for want of a better word, stuff. And the whole digital twin thing, which is emerging as an idea. And I think some people have got a much better idea of it than others, but it's still a buzzword that's not well understood and not perfectly defined, that's for sure. So it's on my list. But, coming to the point of like, well, how do we make our profession a profession? At the moment, it's not a profession. It's a craft. It's an art. It's not quite there. We're all kind of struggling to come to terms with the fact that we look around and we see people call themselves engineers who have post-nominals, chartered engineer, incorporated engineer, that kind of stuff. And in Europe, it's Euring, which is their labeling of this. And so it occurred to me and us, I know, we both know a lot about this now, that why don't we try and emulate what professional engineers in other disciplines do? And there's a pattern and there's a governing body and there's a set of standards for professional competence that we can bring to bear. So the Institute of Electrical Engineers, Mechanical Engineers, Civil Engineers, and about 35 or so other institutions, all in the UK, fall under a regime which is run by what's called the Engineering Council. And they have this thing called UK Spec, which defines a set of capabilities for professional engineers at 3 levels, as a technician, as an incorporated engineer, and as a chartered engineer. And very roughly, you could say these would map to a tester with, say, 2, 3, 4 years experience, 5 or 6 years experience, 7, 10 or beyond experience, whether they've been a test manager for many years, perhaps. And so, what we're looking at is trying to create an institution, provisionally called the Test Engineering Institute, to align with the Engineering Council in the UK, but offer an international scheme based on the definitions of the capabilities and experience requirements defined in this UK spec idea. So it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's early days, I'd say it's still an idea, or it's a concept rather than a product or a real thing, but the pathway looks pretty clear as to how we can make that happen. What I don't know yet, what we don't know, is whether it would fly as a viable proposition, self-funding, probably not-for-profit, almost certainly not-for-profit organisation, because it takes a lot of admin to run these things, and there's a lot of partnering to be defined. There's a lot of volunteers that we'd need to accumulate to assist with it, and also there needs to be a base of people who are involved with it who are themselves have gone through the registration process. So you and I both need to do that, which may or may not be a comfortable experience, but for heaven's sakes, we've got to do that if we're going to suggest other people might do it as a good thing. I think in general it is a good thing. The big question isn't whether it's a good thing to do; it's whether its time has come. And I think that's what's a little bit uncertain yet, and why I've been talking about this for about 3 or 4 years, on and off. But professionalism in general, for as long as I've been in the bloody business, has its time come? And I think that's kind of what we're fishing for at the moment, trying to get a handle on that. Some people I've met are very enthusiastic, others less so, saying, "Oh, don't throw another standard at me. I don't need any of that nonsense." But anyway, so that's another stream of activity that I know we're both involved in, of course.
We are indeed. And, you know, you raise a good point. You know, by the community, for the community. Part of it is, you know, this is what people want. They kind of want support. They want mentorship. I actually took on a new Padawan learner, Lady Loco, to help her, you know, mentor her to get her public speaking, professional development. And, you know, part of that is you could do that, you know, and you know, I remember, you know, when I started in the 90s, you know, it was find a mentor, right? People like Dorothy, people who, you know, will happy to want to help drive the industry forwards. And I think they're now at that stage where it's like, well, actually, that's fine for the lucky few that we can, you know, spare time for. But actually, how do we make that more scalable? How do we allow people who are going through their professional development career, maybe even starting out in the testing industry and thinking, well, you know, other industries have similar structures within, you know, Square and the universal formats to identify. I've done 6 years. You know, I've been peer reviewed by my peers. I've done these. You know, I've got this kind of level of evidence. Now I'm at, you know, the standard first level. My next level is going to be going here and getting the support that they need. You know. Yeah. As people probably know, or you know, you started the test management forum, now the assurance management forum, and that I think that was nearly 20 years old. And then of course, you know, I was the president of, well, still out, well, not anymore, but you know, still am the president of the Vivek community, which was the largest software community on the planet, you know, with 80,000 people at its heyday, with, you know, over 120 countries. You know, what we've learned from, you know, managing these non-for-profit kind of, you know, testing communities is that, you know, people want to share, people want to, you know, give back to the industry. They want, you know, them to attend and learn from other people. You know, they want to be able to publish articles and get recognized for what they're doing in their craft, and they want to specialize, right? And I think this is where we take those communities and we kind of bring them together under the you know, Test Engineering Institute and really look at how we support them going forwards. And you know, these little steps that we're doing, you know, the work that you're doing with the glossary, you know, and that, you know, committing to kind of a day a week to pull out a definition that people want to know more about. You know, it's what we're doing is trying to provide a foundation to allow people to share and you know, engage with other people within their community stack. And I think that's incredibly useful. And you know, the same as Gartner, right? Gartner becomes kind of a de facto standard when we're talking about IT, the IT industry. But it's a similar kind of thing. You know, we've got specialist interest groups like the BCS. We've got pockets of communities that have spun up. And, you know, I think bringing that together is really important for the next generation. And so I'm really excited about that. I think that's a big FY23 kind of big task for us to get our teeth stuck into. But, you know, back, you know, for tech for a second, you know, we talked, there's so many of these kind of hype curves coming along. there's so much going on in the industry. I noticed yesterday or the day before they had a write-up about the HUSTEF event that you organized being the best conference ever run. And I'll
Really?
paraphrase on there. I know I was at Star West, you was at running the HUSTEF event, and it had bigger numbers at the HUSTEF event, and it's obviously had a lot of follow-on and interest about how you organize these kind of large events. We had obviously Ray Arell, a good friend there. It was a really good event. Taking what we've learned from things like doing the testing festival with 10,000 people registering, doing the HUSTEF, conferences, physical, virtual, hybrid, which we're going to do next week, and we'll see how that goes down. Is it enough? Do you think we still need things like local user communities and local user groups and specialist interest groups? What else do we need to do?
Oh heavens! Well, again, just to step back for a moment, is the Institute and the Engineering Council kind of standard, for competence isn't just about doing certification classes. It's much more rounded and 360-degree kind of thing, because there are five areas very quickly. There's like knowledge and understanding, the technical skills, problem solving rather than just knowing stuff. So to demonstrate that you've been involved in a real project that solves a problem. There's the aspect of responsibility, managerial aspects, leadership, that kind of thing. And there's communication, interpersonal skills, incredibly important in most people's world now. And then there's a professional commitment to ethics and standards and stuff like that, and to continue learning, because we have no choice. I mean, if you work in projects, every project is unique. Every project is a learning opportunity. So what I wanted to say is that this notion of registration is not more of the same. It's not more ISTQB. I mean, ISTQB has its place in all this, but that's not the same as professional registration. If you like, having a passport, perhaps, to getting better jobs. That's kind of what its aim is. In terms of what we need, we need it all, because different people learn in different ways. You could put it that way. So local kind of meetups, there's I don't know how many now, but there's a handful in the UK which are distributed geographically. Again, a lot of these meetups haven't met for some time because of COVID, but they're beginning to wake up again, I think. And for example, the Test Management Forum, as was, and obviously involved over, it kind of rebranded over several years. I think there's demand for doing that kind of stuff again, but it takes time and effort to organise, needs a little cash to keep it solvent. But absolutely, training, conferences, what you're doing today with Gartner, getting things out there, streaming content to the web and the wider community. I think, conference organisers need to not be jealous of the content and keep it to themselves almost. Although they may think, well, if we stream all the content live from our live conference, with 300, 400, 500 people, are we going to lose a couple of hundred people because they would say I can get it at home or at my desk in the office? I think they have to let go of that and just be open to a multimedia kind of the whole set of channels. And as I believe you might explain what you're doing today if you haven't done it already, but the whole Restream thing is a multi-channel streaming service, isn't it? So more power to your elbow. Yeah, we've got to do this stuff.
No, and I think, and I think you've raised a great point. One of the things we did with Testing Festival is we made sure that all the content that we did was available for free online. So anyone going to testing-festival.com today, you can go on and you can watch Paul's session. You can go and watch, the sessions that Alan Page did for Microsoft. You can go and see Dorothy's session. I think there is a lot of content, and we're now in a post-pandemic landscape. This hybrid model works for some people. The digital nomads of the landscape may not be near London anymore. They may not be able to quickly get into an event location, and And we are expecting a lot more from virtual, right? But we also really want the engagement, because that's really what we miss from the physical events, is the ability to talk to people, have conversations around, you know, some of the challenges which they're doing, you know, really kind of get more, you know, personal and engaged with those people. And I think, you know, we're seeing this at Gartner, right? I was genuinely surprised, out of probably the last 6 weeks being at 6 different conferences, this was the one where people were genuinely coming up to us and asking us, how do I get started with testing? Because it's a real challenge. And it was a CIO discussion that they recognize.
Oh my God, what have you been doing?
But you know, we don't usually see that, because we're usually at a test conference, maybe like Star West, Star East,
exactly.
You know, where actually the testing practitioners, they've already recognized testing's hard, it's difficult, and they need more help.
It's a long,
but also,
I was going to say, it's a long-standing challenge that we've all got, in that we're preaching to the converted. You know, all the testers at testing conferences know how important testing is. It's the people down the road in the SAP world who might be in a conference 20 times bigger, and are they hearing the same message from the people who are doing testing in that world? And maybe a little bit, maybe not, we don't know. But we have been, I think, far too kind of isolationist. And one of the benefits of trying to get testing on the map through an institute, a professional registration idea, is I've no doubt developers would want something similar. They want to be called development engineers and have a professional, you know, the post-nominals, chartered engineer after their name. So I think the other thing is that in terms of change, because I think this is what the game we're in at the moment. I mean, we always say things change, it's always going to change. But the stuff that's going on at the moment is more, as much as it is technological change, there's an awful lot of social change and a realignment of what we think are the important capabilities of people, you know, with professional skills becoming more important. Historically, everybody was a techie and we didn't need skills beyond techie skills. Well, that's gone out the window now. I think that's all gone. But society is changing. So now conferences have got to be very, very aware of having a gender balance, to have rules of behavior, and not anything goes. You know, there's free speech, and then there's stuff that is not acceptable. And people don't want to work in offices anymore. Some do, some don't. And so that's a big social change. People working from home, staying with their family. If they've got young kids, it's a boom to be working at home. So there's an awful lot going on, and we've got to try and figure out how to get through this. And maybe the metaverse can help. It's got its place, I'm sure. But there's an awful lot to worry about, if that makes sense. And professional conference organizers, you know, need to make a living. And I don't think the market for conferencing is ever going to be the same. A lot of conferences, physical conferences, will have died away and been replaced by online ones. So a lot of change, yeah, everywhere.
No, I love it. No, and so just to finalize adding some tech into that kind of conversation, actually. So big shout out to kind of Joe Colantonio this week. You know, he featured the Meta Quest Pro demo that I did from literally just that landed, but also to your point, which is something you've been talking about for quite a long time, which is an integrated test environment. Actually, JetBrains launched the first ever test automation specific IDE this week. I think it was this week or last week, called Aqua. And you know, part of, I know, your dream, and it's something I know you've been working with testing vendors to kind of get to. And you know, I'm kind of, you know, quite excited about you know, potentially how we can develop this kind of capability. Obviously, having an integrated test environment, giving information to the tester to give them, I'm going to use the word superpowers, you know, I think is really valuable. And actually, I was chatting with the R&D guys this week, and we're looking at creating a Chromium browser variation, open source, kind of, that is specific to testing. So allow people to have something I know you've held quite closely to your heart as well, but you know, to split the screen into a model-based testing kind of view. So you can see, well, I'm on this screen, and let's call it the login screen, and I can see that this is where I am in the model. You know, if there's a new component like forgot password or two-factor authentication, that kind of mend automatically sends you that new model. So auto discover as you're going through to one of the tools that you generated before. You can also see where other people are going through the application. So if someone's already logged in with a valid, invalid one, or they've tested the API, or they tested the OAuth API, you don't need to do it. Whereas they'll also provide you things like test data to say, okay, well, actually log in with this credential because this person's got a different state of the account than. So you're not just going in. I'm going to use the word happy path for a second, but you know what I mean. But more excitingly, and this is kind of where it's actually come to light over the last few weeks of these events is open telemetry, right? Is once you open telemetry, there's a company that we're working with called Test Trace, which will actually take a transaction that happens in your APM. So if you've got an APM like Dynatrace, who are here today, New Relic, Splunk, who are here today, and my good friend Todd DiCaprio. Part of it is we can take that open telemetry data, and that will then give us a root cause pinpoint failure analysis test observability. So you've got your model here, you've got your transaction that's loaded, and then you've got the route that's actually gone through to the database that has, validated that your account exists or something. And then within that kind of new integrated test environment, you could then go, well, actually, I see the underlining, a bit like Google developer functionality on steroids specifically for testers. Then you could right click on it and go, actually, I want to create an SV component out of that API and now test it against a stub or a shib. I want to change the data that's been sent in the payload for the API. I want to create an API test, maybe in Postman or somewhere else. So suddenly you're giving the power to allow, what I remember talking to Dorothy about in the 90s, this manumation approach where you can, or session-based testing as it's more recognizedly known, where people go through and as they're doing exploratory, as they're doing, guided or, testing activities, it's capturing the automation, it's capturing all the debugging and test observability of all the systems that it's interacting with. And, it was the same conversation that we had yesterday with Adam around, we need open testing. We need some way of exchanging. So if you're using Selenium, you're using JMeter, it doesn't matter. Your results come into the same kind of format, which we refer to as an echo database, which is very exciting. But, all this kind of tech is that it's actually not about the tool. And as you always say with tools, that's just the logistics side of thing. It's actually about the collaboration. It's about bringing the information to people instead of them having to context switch between different systems, maybe go through and do log analytics on logging information, bring that all to one place. And it don't discriminate. You could be a manual tester, you could be an exploratory tester, you could be a crowd tester, you could be a UAT, BAT tester. It generally doesn't matter. If you're a system integration tester, wherever you are, you want to be able to get all the information that you need. I think this might be a step in the right direction. Of course, no one tool to rule them all, but I think this is kind of is your dream of what you've been talking about for a long time around leveraging modeling, as well as being able to provide testers with the information that they need or the data they need. And observability is huge. And obviously the APM vendors, the application performance management vendors, have managed to all get together and agree on open telemetry. We now, as testing vendors, need to start agreeing about open testing and how we store, results, reports, video, root cause analysis information, and and not avoid that kind of vendor lock-in kind of what we had in the past, which was, we didn't want to share that information, didn't want to be able to layer that information on, and maybe data is key after all. But yeah, I think we are maturing as an industry as well, and I think that's what we're seeing in these kind of events is people genuinely thinking, okay, it's time for us to all start thinking about how we work together for the same, I'm going to say for the greater good there, but making testing great again. I'm not allowed to buy the red hats, so part of it is more of a wider thing. But anyway, with that kind of said, and a bit of credit for your ITE side of stuff, but I think this is definitely something we're going to also talk about with the over the next year is how can we leverage things like TKB, look at things like the tools profiler from Isabel, which I think is a brilliant idea. If you're a certain size company, what is the maturity, what's the tools, what's the process you could start off on. Don't just think that everyone's working the same way from a people, process, technology perspective. It's not the technology is the problem. It's it's usually a people problem. So with that said, I'm going to let you kind of close us out with any of your kind of wise words and thank you for joining the library.
But the way I kind of when I was on stage in Budapest at Hustef, I kind of gave a talk about tools, futures, that kind of stuff, kind of regular kind of thing. And my conclusion, like on stage, it just came to me. I thought, we're talking about this in kind of we're not being ambitious enough. And so all the telemetry, what's going on all the hardware, the network traffic, service calls, messaging, all that. I want all that captured, and I mean all of it. Because if I don't capture it, I'm not in control of my world. I can't call myself an engineer because I'm ignoring things that may or may not be important. So I kind of came out with this. I want it all. I want it now, and I want it for all time.
Did you start singing as soon as that you came to that conclusion? I want it all. Is that the next conference you're going to do, Paul?
But where AI comes in is while all this data is being collected, the AI stuff, all the clever stuff that can do, is monitoring it. And I want it to wake up every now and then and say, hey, you ran this test yesterday and you've run it again today. Well, it's funny because yesterday I got 3 messages sent to this server. Now I've only got 2. Maybe you should have asked the developers what's going on. Or is that a bug? Or maybe you need some more testing or whatever. The memory use here has gone up, or the traffic on this network, this leg of the network has suddenly shot up, or nothing's happened. Something's stopped happening. What's going on? And of course, none of this is visible to the user through the user interface, but it's all there. And it's all stuff that change triggers, and whether it's a change in the environment or the developers have made a change or a configuration change, whatever, I want to know about it. Now, some of it is going to be like false negatives, not going to be a problem. It's just a natural thing that ways work. But I want to be aware of that, and I want the developers to be aware of that as well, that we can now do that. And of course, what will then happen is developers will say, I want those tools too. And what we really want to happen is for the developers to have a proper integrated development environment that does more than source control, code editing, and running unit tests. Surely they want it all as well. And if we can make some progress on that tool, that'd be great. But I think developers are probably going to be the people driving that, because they've got much more clout. There are 10 times more developers on the planet than testers. So the vendors, the test vendors, or the vendors of those products, I think will pay more attention to developers. But we've got to give the developers that vision, and so they can say, well, this is what you really, really ought to be doing if you're going to call yourself a proper bloody engineer. Anyway, I'll close with that.
No, I love it. And, I know one of the extra bits that you missed out of that was, when we were at Eurostar, you mentioned, actually, I want to turn my back. And when I'm turning my back and going out for a cold beer or maybe just a coffee, you want the system to go off and start testing, right? You want it to, that's the opportunity where autonomous
why wouldn't
test
I want
design.
it to do that? Yeah, why wouldn't I want it to think, for itself and be independent and saying, Paul's writing documentation or he's in a meeting. Well, what could I be doing? I'm talking as if it's a human. It's obviously not. It's a bot. But that bot could wake up and say, I notice from the data that I've got in my massive repository, my mega brain, let's say, we haven't run these tests in this area for a while. Or I noticed Joe in the next team is testing this interface quite heavily. Maybe I should let him know. Does he want a hand? Could I be creating some data? That this guy could use, because I know about production data as well. In that, if we're taking logs from production, that's also an input to the testing kind of game. It's all part of the sources of knowledge. So tools aren't going to replace testers. What they're going to do is it's like it's me plus what a tool will do is it leverages your skill. And so what AI can do is do things that testers can't easily do, which is pore over data, looking for patterns, and trying to figure out what clever stuff could we suggest. So, if you like, the way I'm thinking about how AI works is AI makes suggestions. Some of them we let it go off and do that suggestion to run some tests, to do some exploration of its own in its own way. And sometimes we'll take that idea on board and do something ourselves as humans. But the tool makes suggestions primarily. It has an autonomy. I think we can allow for that. Because at the end of the day, running a test takes some computer resource, but if it's monitoring the resources it's using, it knows it can squeeze in a few tests through the back door, and it can work all night, tirelessly. That's how it should be.
No, just passes my phone. Sorry, no, I was just trying to check if we've got any questions on here before I do. But no, I completely agree, and I think the word on there of augmented testing, right? And I actually think this is where also, if you think of things like Amazon mTurk, you could potentially push out tasks to people in crowd testing, people who are solving problems, to also augment when we can't run 24/7, 7 days a week. How do we potentially leverage that? And so let me just quickly check before we close up to see if there's any questions. When you mentioned about sources of knowledge, I actually think straight away I was thinking to myself, okay, well, actually, again, a new model for testing, that's another source of knowledge. There's no way that I would know that yesterday it had 2 request response pairs, today it had 500. So, part of it is you really got to take advantage of the fact that there's certain things that are better for testers to be doing and focusing on from a kind of a cognitive perspective than there is just doing some boundary pair analysis or doing something that's really equivalence partitioning or whatever it is that maybe you don't need to test that. It will take all the different values in the password field because that's just React. So part of it is, I think we've hit the nail on the head. It's about giving testers superpowers, but it's also about to your Queen kind of quote, they want it all. And they want it now, but they want all that information to give them the test observability so they can make better decisions. They can do more with less, and they can supercharge their their testing experience. And I think we've probably been the poor citizen in this when other people have had some of this information, and we've maybe due to kind of the synergy of things like DevOps, we've not had access to the same operational tools that other people have had for observability of systems. So I think it's an exciting time ahead, and I know we've got a lot to do. I will make sure that we share the test model, the Test Engineering Institute stuff, the links to the glossary of terms, and also to your YouTube channel for the session. I actually haven't watched the quality one. That's the only one I haven't watched yet, and I know we have some controversial conversations around quality, so I'm actually I'll add that one in at the bottom. Well, but thanks for dialing in remotely to the Gartner event. It just shows you, we can get technology to work if we want to.
Yeah. One last thing on the videos is I'm now advertising the videos in quite a few of the LinkedIn groups, which seems to be because some of those groups have like 250,000 members. And so what I've discovered is by doing that, I get like 500 views in a day, and I've got just over 1,000 kind of followers or registered kind of followers on YouTube, but there's probably 200,000 or 300,000 people that we can reach very quickly. So the quality one was the highest. It got 500 users in about a day and a half. So I think that's the way to do it in the future. Groups are good. LinkedIn groups are good.
Well, yeah, anyway. And we'll be soon seeing some of the groups that we've got on LinkedIn. No spoiler alerts, changing as part of the Testing Engineering Institute, and really what that means for some of the old communities. Bringing them all together, I think, is what we've needed in the testing community for a while. But thanks. It's been as always, it's a pleasure, Paul, and hopefully we'll be catching up in the physical location, and also I'll add in the BCS event for next week. I'll be doing opening keynote on the Wednesday, and you'll be hosting all day the virtual one, which is free to go to. So I'll make sure people get there and they register.
Yeah. Great stuff. Thank you. I'm very happy to do it.
And with that said, I'm going to press the magical stop button, which I